Hello and welcome all of you to the second day of our Research Integrity Week 2026. Today's session focus on detection, accountability and systematic abuse. Topics will require both courage and clarity. And I welcome you all from around the world. So it's a good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and please, for me, it's also morning. So I have my cup of coffee. So you can also take your cup of coffee and let's do this wonderful session. So sorry for a little bit of the delay, but now we can properly start our session. So our first speaker today is Dr. Elizabeth. Uh, it is the true honor to introduce Dr. Elizabeth, a globally respected scientific image forensic expert, whose work has led to thousands of correction and retraction in biomedical literature. Her talk, Errors and Misconduct in Biomedical Research Images, will demonstrate how image manipulation occurs, how it can detect, and how AI is changing both detection and deception. Dr. Elizabeth, thank you for your courage and commitment to science. We are looking forward to hear your talk.
Thank you, Dr. Said. I will share my screen. That should work, I hope. Got my green line around it, so you should be seeing my screen.
Yes, it's
Great, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Bick. I used to work at Stanford. I have worked at fraudulent companies, quite a story, but I'm currently unemployed, self-employed, but I'm affiliated with the Stanford University Metrics Institute, which is a meta science institute. So I'm an affiliate, which means I do not get any salary, but I have access to the scientific literature, which obviously is very helpful for what I do. My financial disclosures, because I'm not employed, is that I give talks and get money for that. And I occasionally will do consulting for, let's say, a university or for a publisher that has received allegations of misconduct. I also receive donations through patreon.com. And like I said, I have access to the Stanford Library, to the scientific literature, but also access to two software tools that you can use to find duplicated images. And for those of you who were there yesterday morning, we already discussed those a little bit, but I think I have a slide in there that sort of shows how it works. But it's basically software where you can drag and drop a PDF, a scientific paper, and it will find duplications within those papers, even within a photo, but also, very importantly, between two different papers. So it has libraries. Both of these software tools have libraries of images. So you can find somebody stealing another image, for example. I started this work in 2013. And in 2013, I was working at Stanford, and I found that somebody had plagiarized my work. On the left of this slide, you can see the text of it was an Intech Open book chapter that had been published a year earlier in 2012. And that text contained two paragraphs that I had written. And you can see that in the text marked in red, so in the left panel on the top right. But the text also contained words or even paragraphs that were written by other people. You can see text marked in green, in cyan, and in pink. So other text, it was sort of this patchwork of different texts. And it made me very angry because somebody had stolen my text and didn't ask for permission, didn't even cite me. And so I was starting to look as a hobby for plagiarized text. And the way I did it is just using Google Scholar and taking a sentence from a scientific paper that has been highly cited and that you trust, and see if that sentence occurs in other places. So you might find PhD theses or even papers. Now, most journals nowadays will screen for plagiarism, but this was 2013, early days, I think, of such screenings. And so I found several papers, and I also found a PhD thesis that you can see on the right. But yeah, other than plagiarism, it also had problems with the images. So I noticed, even though I was looking for plagiarized text, I noticed this Western blot that you can see in the middle panel at the bottom. And I've put this cyan or turquoise box around it. It's a Western blot. You see 4 horizontal stripes and a little dot. And I saw the same photo, but in mirror image on in another figure. You can see that at the bottom right. You can see it's the same 4 stripes and that little dot, and that was the one that gave it away. And I'm like, I've seen that photo before. It's just a mirror image. And then I found a third occurrence of that photo, or part of the photo, that you can see in the right panel in the middle. And now it's back in its original orientation, but it's stretched a little bit differently. But most importantly, all these panels have different labels. And so the same photo was used to represent different time points, different dilution series. And then I found another occurrence of such a reused photo that is the one that I've marked in red, and again used for 2 different sets of experiments. And I reported these PhD thesis chapters had also been published as scientific papers. And yeah, so I published this, and these papers were retracted. So this led me to believe that I have a special talent for finding duplications. And that is true, because I've always been able to see duplicated floor planks or duplicated bathroom tiles. Now, of course, if it's a natural tile or natural wood, then you wouldn't expect duplications. But if it's a laminate floor or porcelain tiles, now usually you'll see these repeats. And so I've always been able to spot these. And I thought maybe I should use this for a better purpose. Maybe I should use this to find duplications in scientific papers. I also realized that what made me angry is that these photos that have been reused were not telling the truth, because it was the same photo telling 2 different stories. So for me, science is about finding the truth. That is my core belief of what science should be. And we build on each other's work as scientists. Basically, every publication is like a brick in a wall, and we layer new layers of brick on top of those walls. That is the sort of the comparison I always like to draw, because science papers cite older science papers, and those cite even older science papers. We build on each other's work. And also, we tend to believe what we read. If we read a scientific paper, if we peer review a paper, we tend to believe that what we read in that paper is true. And so there's this almost naive trust in each other's work. But unfortunately, like in any other aspect of life, there are errors and there is even fraud in science. It's not immune to that. And of course, also, as scientists, we all feel this pressure to publish one way or another. And if we feel this pressure to publish, that will lead some people to cheat. It will lead people to cut corners, to do sloppy work, make errors, or even do photoshopping, for example. And so it's this complex ecosystem science where we just feel this pressure to publish, and some of us might be cheating. And how can we find that? Now, I'm part of a growing group of people who care about post-publication peer review. This is sort of how we call it, where even after a paper has been peer reviewed and published, there could still be problems in it. Things could arise, concerns could be visible. Because peer reviewers only is like 2 or 3 people and maybe an editor who will look at the paper. But once a paper has been published, now there's much more visibility, many more eyes on these papers. So I'm part of a growing team of sort of science detectives, and people have called us sleuths, which also sort of means detective. It's not a word I was familiar with, but I've learned this. So we are the science sleuths, I guess. You see a bunch of names here. You'll hear from Reese. And I think I have, let's see, I hope I have. Sholto, yeah, Sholto is there as well. Okay. So you'll hear from three of us tonight, three of us sleuths, and we all specialize in slightly different things. We all have different ways of how we scan the literature. But, and some of us, of course, publish under our full name. And you also see some names in italics who are publishing under a pseudonym. They do not really, for whatever reason, they might not really want to give away who they are, although some of these folks have actually uh, revealed who they are. But I'll usually call them by their pseudonym. And we all specialize in different things, like I said. Some of us look at plagiarism, some of us look at statistical problems, or clinical trials, or images. And when we find concerns in papers, we will post these concerns on a website called PubPeer. We already discussed this yesterday also a little bit. So pubpeer.com is a website where you can comment on a paper as long as it has a DOI, a unique identifier. Anna Albalkina talked about that yesterday as well. And or it has a PubMed ID. Then if it has one of these numbers, then you can comment on it on PubPeer. If you install a plugin, a sort of an extension for your browser, you don't have to post yourself, but you can actually see then if a paper has received a PubPeer comment. You can see that on the left. I did a literature search on the left, and you see these either red or greenish bars appear. That means that paper has a PubPeer comment. You can click on it and see what people had to say about it. And it can be concerns about images, plagiarism, lack of ethical approval, whatever, but you can comment on it. PubPeer is moderated. You cannot just say what you want. It needs to be verifiable. So you cannot say you're a fraud. That would not pass moderation. But you can say this image looks remarkably similar to that image. And we like people to use this plugin because it gives you some extra information. And you might see images or other problems that you might not have picked up on yourself, but that other people saw. So it's sort of a nice way to share our concerns. I focus on images and on photos, to be more exact. And if you think about data in scientific papers, it could be either in the form of tables, line graphs, or photos. And some scientific papers don't even have data in any of these forms at all. But tables and line graphs, other people specialize in those. I have sometimes trouble finding concerns about them, although occasionally you might see a duplicated row in a table or so. But photos for me tell a much more complex story. They have lots of pixels, and you can see if images are the same or if they overlap. And you can see on these blots and gels on the right that each of these bands are slightly different. Like every band and every cell and every tissue has its unique shape. And so we don't expect two images to overlap. But occasionally you might come across images that do overlap. And that sometimes is appropriate, but it could also be inappropriate when an image duplication is incorrect. So here are the three main groups. A simple duplication on the left. You see 4 different panels with each of them has a different label. But 2 of these panels, the ones that I've marked in red boxes, are identical. Now this is potentially an honest error. We don't know that, but it looks like, somebody just grabbed the wrong photo. This can happen. In the middle, you also see 4 panels, but here the panels overlap. So the sample under the microscope was moved a little bit around and different photos were taken, but they all overlap with each other. All 4 photos are one way or another connected to the other ones. And so that is a bit more likely to have been done with an intention to mislead, as we usually say. On the right, you see 1 photo, not 4. And in that 1 photo, you see duplicated elements. About half of the image is sort of repeated in the other half of the image. Now, we assume this doesn't happen in nature by itself, that these tissues don't have identical groups of cells. And we assume here that this was done by a human, that a human went in and let's say, photoshopped the image. We do not know if it was misconduct, because maybe in this case it looks like it was really, they were really trying to mislead the reader. But in some cases you just see this happening in a corner where like one corner is duplicated, maybe to remove, let's say, a scale bar or a label, or maybe just a hair or a crack. But in this case it seems to be deliberate. Now we don't know that, but we can raise concerns. And so these are the three types of image duplications. Now, I usually play the game with my audience of image forensics, where you can become your own sleuth. And you can see if you find these problems yourself. So here we see 9 photos from 3 different patients treated with 3 different experiments. That doesn't really matter. But 2 of these panels, which should not be identical, but 2 panels are identical. Now, I think when I tell you that 2 are identical, you will probably find them. And these are the easiest to find. And so here they are. I've labeled them with blue boxes. So this is a simple duplication. Again, I do want to point out these are mostly honest errors. And in this case, it was fairly quickly, well, no, not fairly quickly. Years later, it was corrected by the authors and the journal. So it took a couple of years, but finally the authors said, oh yeah, here's the correct photo. Here it is. So let's assume this case was an honest error. Here's an example where you see 4 different photos and there are 2 pairs of overlap. So 2 photos overlap with each other and the other 2 overlap. And I'll just show it to you. Here, this paper received an expression of concern because there's no 4 different experiments here. 2 photos overlap with each other, shown with blue boxes, and the other 2 overlap with in the area marked with a cyan box. And this paper received an expression of concern. Again, 3 years later, after I reported. Takes a while. You have to be very patient when you are a sleuth. Now, I want to point out these 2 different examples. We've seen part of the example on the right. Both contain type 2 duplications, where samples have been shifted under the microscope, or in other words, samples are overlapping with each other. But I'm showing these 2 examples because they were handled very differently by the editor, or by the journal, you could say. So both have similar problems, but they were published by 2 different groups, published in 2 different papers. The paper on the right was published in PLOS ONE and was retracted. Again, it took a couple of years, but I think that's a good outcome. I feel if so many samples overlap with each other, that is not just, oopsie, we made an error. This seems to either be extremely sloppy or done with an intention to mislead, where maybe just 2 samples were just obtained and they took different photos and some of them overlap with each other. But it casts serious doubt over the rest of the experiment. Even though you don't see the overlap, you can imagine that a person moves it so far that there's no overlap for me to find, but we can assume that some of the other data in this paper is probably also not very trustworthy. On the left, we see a very similar problem. Lots of samples overlap with each other. But here, the authors were allowed to issue a correction by the journal. They were allowed to send in a completely new set of samples. And I think a completely set of photos. And I feel that's not a good outcome because it's so extreme on the left that you should just not give the authors another chance, I feel. I mean, they can repeat their experiments and try to publish it again, but I don't feel it's fair to have these problems addressed with just a correction. It's just to show you how different editors can respond to very similar problems. There's no good guidelines. There's just not, everybody just does what they think is correct. But yeah, I wasn't happy with that outcome. Here's an example of a type 3 duplication. So here we're looking at a duplication within photos. The 2 photos don't overlap with each other, although they do come from the same paper. But the photos, each of these photos has internal duplications. Maybe you've spotted a couple. If I tell you there's duplications, you might spot 1 or 2. Some people are very good in finding these things by eye. and others need some more help. But yeah, I know that there's certain problems, and some of them are I think 5 or 6 repeats within the same photo. So here are they. Here are all the repeats. There's just a lot of them, and I don't know what the original photo looked like. The authors never replied. The journal did not respond yet. Yeah, we're just waiting for a good outcome, I guess. But this is why I feel Papier is important. We can flag papers for these problems so that hopefully you don't know, you will know that there's a problem with the paper, and warning other scientists not to build their new research project or their write a grant based on these results, because I would not trust the results in that whole paper. I've done this work traditionally by eye. I've looked by eye for inappropriate image duplications. And I published this paper together with Turukas de Val and Ferric Feng in 2016. It was rejected 4 times, so nobody really believed that this was going on. But I think by now most people know that, yeah, there are these visible errors in scientific papers if you know how to look for them. So I screened 20,000 papers. I only looked at the images. I did screen by eye. And I found 40, so I covered 40 different journals and 14 different publishers. And in that set, I found 4% of papers to contain duplicated figures. So around 800. I did the search, and my 2 co-authors had to agree with me. This is how we sort of grew towards each other, but we had some good discussions about, what it's easy to find a duplication, but whether or not it's inappropriate was something I had to learn. So in the end, we had almost 800 papers. We estimated about half of these might be honest errors. Now, that is maybe too generous, we don't know, but you have to make some guess. And so at least half of them we thought were intentional. For example, when 2 photos overlapped, but one was mirrored or rotated, or when a photo had duplications within one photo, like a type 3 duplication. So that was half of that set. But of course, we only catch the dumb fraudsters. Again, if you move your sample a little bit farther under the microscope, you would not have an overlap for me to find. Or if you have to, you want to Photoshop away an undesired band, or you want to copy some more cells, if you do it in a good way, I would maybe not detect the duplication. So there's many ways to do good Photoshopping that I might not be able to detect. So we think that the real percentage of misconduct is much higher than 2%. We still don't know how much it is, but it's probably also much easier to fake result in a table or line graph. So we catch the dumb fraudsters, we catch the ones that leave very visible traces for us to find, but that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. Unfortunately, a lot of these papers are not really taken care of by the publisher. So I've written for all these 800 papers, I've written to the journals, and after 5 years, so in 2015, we reported them, and in 2020, 5 years later, 2/3 of these papers, that big blue part of the pie chart on the left, there was no action taken. And by now, 10 years in, there's still 40% that is no action, where no action was taken. So that is disappointing, and that is why we post on Papier. And by now, these are slightly older numbers, but my work has resulted in over 1,500 retractions. I've only published 40 papers, so I have more retractions than papers published. So let's switch a little bit, because if we talk about photos, of course, now there's this new technology called AI, artificial intelligence, and it's sort of this elephant in the room. We can do great things with it, but we can also use AI for deception. So I have some examples here. Of course, moving to the left of the screen, we can use AI for great things. For example, I'm using Image Twin and Proofvik, which can help me find duplicated images or even duplications across papers. And both of these tools use AI, but I think it's more the pattern recognition AI than the generative AI, but I'm not a computer scientist, so That is my basic understanding. But both of these tools will find duplications in scientific papers. And you see an example. It's the same paper that I used either, I screened it with Image Twin on the left and Proofik on the right. And both of these tools are finding the duplications that I found previously by eye, but it found it perfectly. So this is a science paper that got retracted. We can, of course, use generative AI to help us with our writing. For those of us, including myself, for whom English is not my first language, we can use it to be better writers. And I'm using Grammarly, for example, and a little bit of ChatGPT to help me improve my English, which I make the weirdest mistakes. So, of course, I need some help. And I think that's great because for at least half of the world, English is not a comfortable language to speak or write in. So it helps us become better writers. People have used it for peer review, although there are all kinds of ethical issues there. But it's great for a post-publication peer review because it does pick up on things I might have missed. But it also makes weird errors, so you have to be very, very careful trusting AI. And we can use it for data analysis, all great things. But we can also use, or people can use AI for bad things. We can generate fake images, fake data set. We can do plagiarism with it. You can just ask it to rewrite text by another person, and it will be very hard to detect it with a classical plagiarism detection tool. And it can generate perhaps low quality data, but it's getting better and better. Now, you might have seen, I think almost 2 years ago, the rat with the giant penis. That was clearly an AI generated image. It did not try to be a photo. It was created with Midjourney, and the authors admitted it. They disclosed it. But you cannot really read the labels. They say desigt and duk and this. You cannot read it. It's not biologically relevant or meaningful. But text can also be written by AI. And of course, if you're very, very dumb, you can leave some text in. But that is clearly an indication that the whole paper was written by AI. But it's this thin line, right? You can use AI to improve your English, but you cannot use it to write the whole paper. So where do we draw the line? This is new technology. I think we're all still learning it and seeing what it can do, seeing where it goes absolutely wrong. And I think we're at a stage where we're starting to make up some rules. Like, for example, you cannot upload during peer review your manuscript that you're peer reviewing. You cannot upload that to ChatGPT for ethical reasons. But yeah, this is sort of the new age of data generation. And as image detection tools or sleuths, we're actually very worried about this. So on the left, you see here a photo that Cheshire posted on Twitter. And Cheshire is one of us sleuths, and he just wanted to show how easy it is to take a photo with tumors taken from mice and then generate an extra column of tumors with some AI tool. And I think he used Photoshop. Photoshop now has an generative fill, I think it's called, where you can extend the photo in several directions. And in 30 seconds, you can make completely fake results. Very scary. On the right, you can see even maybe that's still primitive, but if you feed some AI tool enough correct photos, real photos of tissues, as you can see on the right, it can generate, the bottom row is generated based on a library of the top row images, real photos that are used to train this model. And the generated photos, the fake photos, look pretty realistic. And this is already a slightly older paper, and I think by now these models are getting better and better. So it's very easy, and we can no longer say a photo or it didn't happen because we're just not sure if photos are real anymore. And I'm very worried about what that can do to create even more fake science. And then, of course, and I'm showing here an image of a paper that Rees published last year, we have to talk about paper mills. So scientific paper mills are entities that sell authorships. So they either have scientific writers to write fake or low quality papers, or they have all kinds of strategies. They could work with an accepted paper. They could pay money to an editor to accept a paper, so basically bribe them. They could add authors at the last moment. They could hire writers, like I said, to fabricate papers. They could use AI to generate fake images. They could plagiarize papers or use AI to plagiarize and not be detected. And they continuously develop new strategies to avoid detection. And maybe Reese will tell about this graph in his talk, but he estimated that the number of paper mill productions or paper mill papers, I guess, that it's incredibly faster on the rise than all scientific articles. And I want to point out that the y-axis here is on a log scale. So the number of paper mills is quickly on the rise. And there are even estimates that in certain fields, in particular cancer, that maybe 10% of all papers could have signs that they were written by paper mills. You can easily find, not putting any ideas in somebody's head, but you can easily find advertisements for paper mills on, for example, Facebook, where you see these call for authorships. And yeah, so this is a growing problem, and it's polluting science, and we no longer know what to trust. So I think sort of to conclude, like there's this imbalance of research misconduct, because there's this, if you do fraud, there are big rewards to be found. Your experiments will look better if you fake them, and you'll have a better chance of getting grants or build your resume, or maybe get a postdoc at a highly regarded university. You'll get more success. And the consequences, on the other hand, for misconduct are very few. There's relatively very few corrections or retractions. If an institution investigates, that rarely happens, and if it happens, it will take years. There's rarely any action, and sanctions are mild. So there's this imbalance, and it's almost like construction or sports or traffic without the chance of getting a ticket when you do it wrong, or without the chance of being checked for doping use or for fraud in building and construction. And I think we need more checks and balances in science. We need the equivalent of a traffic cop or doping checks in science, because there seems to be very little. And I think fraud has been so much on the rise in the last couple of years that I'm almost like skeptical of any science paper, and always looking if I can find some problem with it. So when I end up, I know we started way too late, so I hope I'm still in time, with the cost of scientific misconduct. So there's a cost for scientists who might follow the false leads if they follow a fake paper. It might generate fake hope for patients, damaged reputations for the co-authors who might not have been into the fraud, but their names are on these papers, and a delayed progress of science. There's a cost for science critics, because folks like us are almost continuously harassed, trying to damage our careers, and we might receive legal threats. And then finally, there's a cost of research misconduct for science, because it's easy to talk about misconduct and think that all science is fraudulent. And I do want to point out, even if it was 10% of all science that might be fraudulent, that still means that 90% of science is being done by people who, might make an error here and there, but who do their best, who are honest. So it's like this rotten apple in a fruit basket. There's still a lot of beautiful fruit in it. We know all this current misinformation that we see on social media, where people say, "Oh, all science is fraudulent. Let's not believe in science anymore." But I hope that is not the case when you listen to my talk. I'm a firm believer in science, but we need to know which science we can trust. So with that, I will stop my presentation. Happy if we still have some time left for questions. Happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was a wonderful talk. Do we have questions?
I see a question in the chat. Let me pull that up. So there's a question from Dr. Anis. How do you see the future of research with AI? Gods and demons. That part I don't quite understand, but AI writing AI and reading AI. Please share hopes and fear as well. I did a little bit of that, so I'm excited when I can ask ChatGPT how to, find me a solution for something. But I'm very worried about how it can create fake references, fake papers, fake statements, how we can influence AI by just feeding it misinformation. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. How can we check that a paper is real? I mean, people have talked about, and this is computer science folks who have suggested that maybe you can sort of watermark a photo that it was really taken with a camera as opposed to AI generated. Now, ideally, you want the AI generators to watermark your photos that they are fake, but I'm sure not everybody does this in a honest way. So maybe we have to require scientists who submit a paper that they have to prove that their photos are real. I'm mainly worried about photos, but there's many other ways that you can use AI to fake a paper. And I'm a little bit pessimistic at the moment, but who knows? Hopefully some problem will be solved by new technology I'm not aware of.
Okay, thank you. More questions? Okay, in the start, you mentioned about tile spotting duplicate images in the tiles. So I was also one day was sitting in my room and I was looking at the tiles and I started spotting all these things. So I can also become a good science detective.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. If you have that talent, please help us. And of course, like my background is in microbiology and in molecular biology, so those papers have a lot of photos of bloods and mice and plants and
Yeah.
things like that. So I don't know exactly your background, but it depends a little bit on the field. But yeah, if you see a problem, don't hesitate to post it on Pop here.
Sure. I think there is something else in the chat box.
Do you think it is high time to allow limited input of AI acceptable to take ethical measures like 20% pilgrim? Maybe they mean
Plagiarism,
plagiarism.
plagiarism,
Yeah,
plagiarism.
plagiarism is allowed. I think 20% plagiarism is a lot, but with AI you can circumvent being detected. You can just write. You can ask ChatGPT to rewrite the text, and it will not be detectable with plagiarism. And I think it's fairly hard to detect if a text has been written by AI. There's some easy giveaways, like it likes the word delve and it likes the em dash and it likes it's not this, it's that. It has particular phrases that you can sort of pick up on that it is AI, but then people use that as well. So I think yeah, it's hard to detect if text is AI written, but I think we need to put the responsibility still on the authors. If authors are writing crap with crappy references and not checking that at all, the responsibility is still with the authors. So I feel those papers should be retracted if that comes to light, or of course not be published in the same published in the anyways. But we yeah, I think it's acceptable to use it, like I said, for language improvement. But maybe there is a future where we just all have we do our experiments in the lab and then we have AI write our science papers. Maybe that is the future. It's currently not good enough, so I'm not quite sure how we have to check for that, and I don't know how to deal with that ethically. And I think 5 years from now, I might have a different answer because I'm also shifting my opinion about AI continuously.
Okay, thank you.
Noor
Noor,
has a question.
Noor, you have a question. Please go on with your question.
Yes, I have a question. Uh,
Yes,
my
please.
question is that publications often create opportunities for scholarships and research funding, especially for early career researchers. But
Mhm.
at the same time, platform that focus on reporting published papers such as post publication review forms or pub peer play a role in research integrity. How should researcher balance the time and effort between producing original ethical research with the academic benefits and engaging in post publication critique? And what is the long term impact of such critique on scientific progress?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think if you are a full-time researcher, especially when you're early career, you probably will not have a lot of time to do active post-publication peer review. I mean, I'm sort of semi-retired. This is what I do. Some people do it as part of because they work more in meta science, so they do it as part of their work. But if you are doing research, you have your own project, I would not expect people to put too much time into sleuthing. As it is a lot of fun, but it is it will take away time for your own projects. But I do encourage people when you see a problem, and especially if you sort of follow or maybe spend 10 minutes a day reading Papier, what people have been posting, you sort of start to get a feel for the type of problems that other people have picked up on. And that means you'll be faster in recognizing problems yourself. So I've been posting on Twitter and now on Blue Sky these image challenges like the ones I showed you, where I show an image like, okay, find the overlap, sort of training people to find these things themselves. And people are sending me emails like, oh, I found one during my peer review. So I do think spending, I don't know, 5-10 minutes a day on Papier, just looking what people post would be very helpful. But yeah, I think it would, if you do that full time, you wouldn't have time to do your own research.
Yeah, I want to say that what is the output of that work is just like traffic on Papier or other platforms, or should be an output which can be seen.
Well, an output would be, or the end result might be either a correction if it's a small error, or an expression of concern, or a retraction. I think retraction is sort of the endpoint for a paper. And of course, authors are always invited to resubmit a paper. But what is even better is that these things don't get published in the first place, that these problems are caught during peer review. And yeah, I think based on the work that sleuths have been doing for the last 10 or 20 years or so, publishers are starting to pay more attention. I don't think it's enough. There's still too much crap that that gets published, but they're getting better in detecting these image problems or other problems upfront, so during peer review. And I think that's a good thing because we don't want these things to be published. Once a paper is published, even if it's retracted, it's very hard to reverse the message, as we have seen with some like one of the most famous retracted papers that still has a huge influence is the Andrew Wakefield paper published in the Lancet, in which he claims that certain vaccines were correlated with autism, and that is still a firm belief by people who think that vaccines cause that, based on that paper, even though it was retracted.
Is there any funding you receive from Papier or platform like that?
I don't receive funding from Papier. I don't get paid to post on Papier. People support me through Patreon, like donations, and that gives me a basic income. But it's all people who pay like $5 a month or so, like what they can miss. So together, it's just a lot of people. So I'm very appreciative of that, and it allows me to not have to worry too much about uh, you know. Uh, asking money or to do consulting work. I do actually very little consulting work. I do a lot of talks for free, like this one, and yeah, so it's a it gives me this basis, but I don't get paid by Papier. I'm not financially related to Papier. I'm
I
not
think
even a moderator. Yeah, no, I just am a user.
I think this made nothing for output for us or early researchers or researchers regarding the fundings and etc.
What was the question? Sorry, I missed the first two words.
I say, what is the output for us,
Oh.
for early researchers, and even for researchers for from funding perspectives? For
Now,
Um,
it
what
like
kind
a
of
time wasting?
uh,
He wants to ask, I think that for early researchers, what is the benefit of putting on the puppy?
right.
I,
There's no benefit other than you're helping
yes.
other scientists, that you're warning other people that there's a potential problem, and you give the authors a chance to reply. So it's sort of almost like volunteer work, I guess. But it's like, if you could prevent another person from starting a research project based on that one problematic image, then you have saved another person's a lot of frustration. And so hopefully you will also be benefiting from looking at pop peer. Let's say you want to work in a lab, in a particular lab, but you see that the lead author, the PI of that lab, has, I don't know, 60 papers on Papier with all kinds of problems, and some are retracted and some are receiving expressions of concern. Now you know that might not be a very good mentor to do your next postdoc in. So it's, I think in the end it benefits all of us. But of course, a lot of authors who have all these papers on Papier are not happy with the work we do. So it creates also controversy where people don't like Papier because nobody likes to be called out for problems in their papers. But I see it sort of as a community service, I guess.
Yeah, it's more of a community service. I also believe that.
It's like peer review. What there's perhaps no direct benefit if you peer review another person's papers, but you hope that somebody will peer review your paper. And I actually learned so much by peer reviewing, especially when you see what other peer reviewers had to say at the next phase of the peer review. You see those other reports. It's just fantastic, where you learn a lot from that.
Yes, it's almost a very good learning platform, I think, also.
Absolutely, yeah. Should we? I mean, I'd love to take more questions, but
Yeah,
I want to be mindful of the time because Reese
yes,
is next.
yes, yeah. So now we move towards our next speaker, and we are very thankful to Elizabeth. She always, I think, talks so nicely and deliver everything so nicely. So we love to hear you. We can hear you a whole day, I think. So. So next we move to our next talk. Our next speaker brings attention to the growing but often ignored issue: the commercial exploitation of intellectual property systems. Dr. Reese Richardson, postdoctoral fellow at Northwest University, studies industrialized academic fraud and systematic manipulation of scientific reputation systems. So his talk, Exploitation of Intellectual Property Systems for the Manipulation of Academic Reputations, reveals how patents and design registrations are misused for career advancement. So thank you very much, Reese, for joining us. And the floor is yours. We are looking forward to hear you.
My pleasure. I am going to fiddle with this really quick. Are we looking at my slides and just my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm happy to see so many people here. My name is Reese Richardson. Like Dr. Saeed said, I am a postdoc at Northwestern, and I try to do systematic research on one of the problems that Elizabeth was talking about just a second ago, and sure we heard a little bit about yesterday, which is systematic fraud in science, the industrialized production of fraudulent science. And I'm going to talk about a facet of that that actually is outside of the realm of academic publishing. But it's going to take a little bit of background to get there. So I'm going to start at a very high level and then go from there. So First off, everything that I talk about today is written up in this paper, which is published in the International Journal for Educational Integrity. You can find a lot more detail in there, and if you have any questions that I can't get to, they might be answered therein. So, first off, it goes without saying that doing science is incredibly complex. It requires a lot of time. It requires access to funds. It requires people to do it. It requires equipment. And it's takes quite a lot of resources from quite a lot of different places. And all of that goes towards doing experiments, sending out surveys, analyzing those experiments, paying people to feed animals, etc. And then the output of this whole process is typically regarded as publications. We had that question earlier about, what is the visible output of what we see here. This is often the end product, right? Is disseminating your scientific work. And then those publications, those articles, are then cited by other articles. So you can follow this trail of citations through the scientific literature back from one paper to the previous generation papers to before that. Now, because science is so complex and resource intensive, and because those resources are very difficult to come across, as anybody that is trying to land a job in science or as a postdoc or even hire people will know or get funding for their research, there have to be mechanisms by which we determine how that funding, how those staff, how equipment is actually doled out. And one of the ways that has sort of become the status quo for how these resources are doled out is for determining how those resources are doled out is using these visible outputs, articles and citations to those articles to evaluate the research and to decide this person is doing good research, so we should give them more funding. This person is doing not so great research, so we should give them less funding. This gets formalized in a lot of different indices and metrics. Some that you're probably familiar with include the H index or the impact factor. Basically, every university ranking around the world is based, at least in part, on citations and the volume of publications that come out of that university. And then you'll see lists like the top 2% highly cited researchers list. And there are even universities around the world that will offer cash bonuses for publishing in a very prestigious outlet. Until recently, China was offering bonuses in the tens of thousands of US dollars for publishing in an outlet like Nature or Cell or Science. And as a result of all of this pressure to increase these metrics, we have seen in the last few years the development of an industry for manipulating those metrics and for manipulating academic reputations overall. So Elizabeth touched on this, but one of the facets of this industry is paper mills. These are organizations that are known to sell pre-written manuscripts, to sell authorship slots on manuscripts that are already under peer review or about to be accepted at scientific journals. They sell access to data around which you can write a new manuscript. They will manipulate peer review. They will sell you citations so that future clients, their paper mill products will cite your paper. They've even been known to bribe editors to make sure that your publication gets accepted. Here is an advertisement that I found quite a while ago now, myself on Facebook, where they're advertising authorship positions on 3 papers that would eventually be published in a Scopus Index journal. And this is really just one facet of this industry. And I'm going to talk briefly about another part of this industry, or I'm going to spend this talk talking about another part of this industry for manipulating the metrics that are used to evaluate scientists. And for that, we're going to look to India. India is one of those places where numbers sort of run the world. For instance, at most universities in India, they have a points-based scheme for how people get promoted. So, for instance, to become a full professor at an Indian university following this scheme specified by the University Grants Commission, which is an organ of the federal government of India, you need to get 120 points. And there are a number of different ways that you can earn those points. Here's just a few of them. You can be a editor on a book, either published by an international publisher or by a publisher from within India. You can have a chapter in that book. Item 1 at the top here is for research papers. If you publish in a peer-reviewed journal, you get 8 points per paper that you publish. And the number of points that you get actually increases with the impact factor of that journal. And another way that you can earn points is by obtaining patents, by obtaining intellectual property in your name. You can see that you could either publish a paper in a scientific journal, or you could get the same almost the same number of points by obtaining a patent in India, or internationally, and then you get a few points extra. So this is one way that you can get towards a higher pay or a better promotion, or obtain a new position. And basically, I showed you that advertisement earlier. One thing that advertisements are one way that sleuths are able to identify potential paper mill products. And one way that we're able to identify new developments within the industry for academic and scientific fraud. And one of the new developments that we noticed in late 2022 was that paper mills that were traditionally just advertising authorship positions on articles and books, or conference proceedings started to advertise patents. And here you can see that there's an advertisement for a design patent in the UK. Somebody's drawing on the screen right now. I don't know who, but we'll roll with it. But you can see that they're offering what they're claiming will be granted in 3 to 4 weeks for a patent for a biosensor device to detect lung cancer. And these advertisements, which were showing up on LinkedIn, were showing up on Telegram groups, were showing up in WhatsApp groups, invariably were mentioning all of the different ranking frameworks and accreditation frameworks that exist in India for assessing individuals and institutions. So we started to look at these advertisements, which often appear directly alongside other paper mill offerings like conference proceeding articles or book publications. And then we wanted to see if they were actually being granted as genuine intellectual property protections. And it turns out, if you look at the titles that show up in these advertisements for UK design patents, you can find granted UK design registrations going up within the time frame promised by the people that were advertising it. So this advertisement that you just saw was published in, I believe, July 2023. And you can see shortly thereafter, there were 2 design registrations that were granted with titles exactly matching those advertised titles. And they were granted each to 5 or 6 Indian academics. So for those that aren't familiar with intellectual property law, and I counted myself among them until recently, I should explain the difference between a utility patent, a design patent, and a design registration. So a utility patent in most jurisdictions covers the way that an invention functions. So on the left, we have a utility patent for a drone, right? It covers the way this drone actually flies. And there's a reasonable expectation that this drone, if you were to build it, would actually work. A design patent covers the way that a product or invention looks. So this example that I have here covers the particular design of this one panel on the iPhone. And a good way of thinking about this is that like a utility patent will cover the formula for Coca-Cola, but a design patent will cover the shape of the bottle, right? So patents, when they are filed, will undergo what's called an ex-ante novelty review. And the idea behind that is that somebody at the intellectual property office will review your application and see if it's one, can reasonably be expected to work. That's important for utility patents. And 2, if it is a novel enough that you can claim intellectual property rights over it. So if you try to patent something that already exists, you're going to have a bad time. On the other hand, a design registration does not undergo ex-ante novelty review. In fact, in jurisdictions that offer design registrations instead of design patents, which includes the UK and India, there is very little review undergone at all. You basically file your design registration and they do a sort of cursory review, mostly to check to see if there's profanity in it. And then they're more or less automatically granted. So what you should know is that when these products were granted, these are not design patents. These are design registrations. So actually, this advertisement was lying to their clients and saying that these are design patents. They're not patents at all. They're basically like copyrights in the same way that you would copyright a word or a phrase. So the fact that these are not reviewed for novelty at all becomes glaringly apparent once you actually look at the content of the design registrations that were being granted. This is the character of the sort of things that people were paying to have their name put on. They look like children's drawings. In fact, in some instances, they are children's drawings, and I'll get to that later. But they are always, some common themes that you'll see is that they're all AI based, or they have to do, they're a humanoid robot, or they're a smart product, or they are solar powered or whatever. And I felt like I was losing my mind when we first saw this. I could not believe that this was something that was actually being granted, but that's exactly how design registrations work, is that they're more or less granted automatically. Um, so basically, these design registrations were being granted, and then Indian academics were paying to put their name on them and pass them off as patents. But again, they don't actually cover how the product works. And in fact, as you can imagine, these products probably wouldn't work. They're literally just drawings on a sheet of paper. They've done no actual inventorship, but they're using them for promotion. And in part, they're being lied to about whether they're actually inventors once they've bought these products. So we found 20 advertisements for which we could actually trace the name of the advertised product to a design registration that was actually granted. And that brought us to two different firms that were filing these design registrations in the United Kingdom. Both of them started filing in early 2023. Between the two of them, they had filed, I believe, 1,500, 1,500 different designs. And you can see that there were very common themes. So you would see that they were AI-based devices for detection or of cancer or what have you. And they were very commonly medical equipment. So they would claim that they are devices for surgery or that they were a cybersecurity device. And like I said, these were granted very, very quickly. And this sort of helps us understand why this is such an attractive option. If we look back to that points-based scheme that we covered earlier, you could spend months in peer review waiting for an article to get accepted, not knowing if it actually will be, or you can spend probably less money to get a patent, which counts for more points, and have it granted in 10 days. Another thing that was interesting about these design registrations is that a lot of them were duplicates. So here you have 5 different design registrations granted on behalf of 5 different sets of authors that all use the same drawings to describe the product. And the product varies from devices for tour planning and management to voicemail devices to HR department management. So they're not described the same at all. In fact, we found that up to 1 in 4 of the designs that were filed by these firms were exact copies of one another. So you can get a design registration invalidated if it's not original, but that requires going to court. If it's not original, that does not mean that it will not be granted. And again, these were pretty much invariably granted on behalf of Indian academics. Sometimes the university was actually listed as one of the applicants on these design registrations. And as if it couldn't be more obvious what was happening here, the 2 most common applicants on all of these applications that we identified owned a company which is still active and is still advertising these services where they offer UK design patents. So this is probably one of the companies that is responsible for most of these things. But we knew that that was probably not the end of it. So we started to look for even more firms that were were probably offering up design registrations and lying to people and saying that they were design patents. So we took the I'm not sure how many this is here. I think it's 15. We took the 15 firms that had filed the most registrations under the classification for medical devices. And then we sorted them into two groups, those that started filing design registrations before 2023 and those that started after. And it turned out that that was all you needed to do to separate what were probably legitimate firms filing on behalf of legitimate clients and firms that were filing on behalf of people trying to manipulate their CVs. One thing that was very different between them, if you look in the top right corner, is that legitimate firms were usually filing on behalf of one or two clients at a time. So Nike would file a design patent titled shoe, and that they would be the single applicant. And then these other firms would be filing design patent or design registrations that had 10 applicants. I'm not sure why they needed 10 applicants. But basically it's, where they're to manipulate their own reputations and to squeeze as many authorship slots out of it as possible. And it would be for an AI powered solar device for crop management. So you would have these long flowery titles. That's what's shown in the bottom left there, is that these firms that were suspicious, the ones that started after 2023, tended to be filing these much longer flowery titles that emphasize the functionality of the product. When again, design registrations have nothing to do with the product's functionality. They just have to do with how it works. One thing that was curious between the firms that we identified as suspicious and the firms that we identified as legitimate is that the legitimate firms actually tended to take longer to have their design registrations granted by the UK Intellectual Property Office. We didn't have sufficient data to actually tease out why this might be the case. They might be filing in different categories overall, but that is sort of alarming that these suspicious firms that were filling the system with these frivolous filings were getting their applications granted at a faster pace on average. Like I said, legitimate firms would usually file design registrations with very boring titles like helmets. And suspicious firms would file with titles like Big Data Analytics Server Machine for Cloud Computing. Because that's what looks better on a resume if you're going to pretend that this is an actual patent. And the consistency in titles was so high that you could actually see the same titles showing up over and over and over again. So this is a network showing each firm as a circle scaled by how many design registrations that firm filed. And then the links between each of the firms showed how many times they filed registrations with the exact same title. So all in all, these firms are probably just different faces of the same operation. If we had to guess, it's probably the company that I mentioned earlier that is owned by two of the people who are mentioned as applicants on these registrations very often. And it's not just that the titles are, or that the registrations are unoriginal. We could often find exactly where the 3D models that they had used for the registrations came from. So for instance, this is a design registration that was filed in 2023, granted only a few days after. And here is the CAD model of a treadmill that it was generated from. Again, like this is not something that you can get, or you should be able to get intellectual property protections for. Some of the designs were actually based off of existing products. So for instance, this is on the left, you have a design registration for a robotic hand, and you can see that it is literally just a 3D model ripped from GrabCAD of an existing product, a KUKA robot. And yeah, this was all over the place. You would see GrabCAD models being repurposed for these design registrations. And often you could look at the GrabCAD profile that they had come from, and you could see that these were literally children that had made these models. It's literally like a my first CAD design sort of thing. And somebody somewhere was making hundreds of dollars off of stealing these models offline and filing for legitimate intellectual property protections in the UK. My favorite among all of these examples is this device, um, an artificial intelligence powered skin cancer inspection device powered by design thinking. I want you to picture in your head what this actually looks like, or what this device might look like. This is probably not what you were thinking. If you're not familiar with firearms, this is in fact a Glock pistol that they put a screen on. And there are probably multiple people out there that have this as their on their CV as something that they invented. And if the connection to the point system in India could not be any more apparent. If you look at the website of that firm that I mentioned earlier, you could find all of the services that they'd actually offer. Basically, every single one of these services is something that would count towards points for promotion in India. And while the story that I've told here today is very specific to India and has very specific to what's going on in India and the UK, although we did notice that there was a lot of they were also offering patents around the world. You can see that they're offering patents in the UK, in Germany, in Singapore, and Japan. You can imagine this sort of thing happening anywhere. Anywhere a particular service or a particular badge is valued for somebody's reputation, there are going to be services that emerge to manipulate those things. I know I've seen many promotion criteria from individual universities in Pakistan, for instance, that mention a lot of the same things as you'll see in the Indian UGC CARE specification. And around the world, these things are valued. So these are the sort of things that happen when these services are valued, but there aren't sufficient resources to go around to actually obtain these services legitimately. So yeah, with that, like I said, this is all in our publication on the topic. The data that we collected, we had a cutoff date, and I think of July of 2024, and the problem has only ballooned in size since then. I think there are now 3 times as many design registrations just from the firms that we identified already. And there are probably many more firms that have sprung up that are offering these services in the UK alone. So yeah, thank you all for listening. I want to thank all of my co-authors here, and I'd also like to thank Kendra Albert, who pointed us in the right direction as we were in an early stage on this project. And finally, I want to mention COSIG. Schulto and Elizabeth have talked or will be talking about various different ways that you can spot problems in publications. If you're looking for more tips, COSIG is an open source handbook written by sleuths around the world that describes how you can spot problems in peer-reviewed publications in various different ways. Like I said, it is open source. It is available right now at cosig.net, and I hope you check it out. But yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Rhys. It was a wonderful talk and very insightful. Do we have questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Please.
Rhys,
Good morning.
why is so much of a problem in the UK? I didn't say the US on there. Is there different kind of policing of these patent type registries in different countries, or
That's a really good
did you try and
question.
inform the authorities in the UK? Did you email them and ask them?
Yeah, they didn't want they wanted nothing to do with it. They were basically like their first response when we brought it to them. Actually, Nick Wise brought it to them first and said these advertisements have gone up. They said it's normal to buy and sell intellectual property rights, which is true, but the real deception here is that they're selling what are not patents as patents. So yeah, there are a couple of recourses that you could imagine could be pursued in the UK. One, you could potentially prosecute the people running these firms that have UK addresses and are selling what is a fraudulent service and lying about it. And then the other one is you could try to invalidate these design registrations in court. But what's funny is that it actually costs about 10 times as much to make a court filing trying to invalidate a design registration than it does to file the registration itself. And then if you get it invalidated, it's like whatever, it's already on their CV. As for why this seems to be localized to specific countries, like we found a lot of evidence for this happening in the UK. We found a lot of evidence for this happening in India and Australia, but not a lot of evidence in the US. It has to do with the difference between design patents and design registrations. So the UK, India, and Australia all have design registration systems. So you file your design and it doesn't undergo novelty review. It's granted relatively quickly, whereas in the US, designs are covered by design patents, and those do undergo novelty review. And novelty
you know, there is a UK law that you have to go to the court. But I was just thinking that is there any case like someone who has been granted this fraudulent patent from academia, and if they have like find out that this patent was not real and it was like cancelled, and then the applicant actually can go to the court that this was the fraudulent patent that was granted to me through such and such firm, and some other way around to stop this practice. Did you notice any of such case?
No, we haven't. we haven't really seen anything like that. Sometimes, and this is not just the case for patents, this is also the case for more traditional paper mill offerings like publications. Sometimes you can look at the Google reviews, and you'll find people that feel that they've been scammed. Sometimes you can look on like Reddit or whatnot, and you can find people complaining about the services, and whatnot. But we haven't seen a lot of people that have bought these services that are dissatisfied with what they're doing. And I think that has to do with this widespread misconception about what's actually being offered, right? Uh, it Indian academics seem to believe, and the firms advertising these services certainly seem to believe that these are indeed patents. And if Indian academics continue to buy these things, that probably means that their universities also believe that these are patents. We're hoping that we can spread awareness of this issue among Indian academics. And we've gotten some press coverage of this to that effect, but unfortunately, we haven't seen a widespread condemnation of this. Although there are some rumblings about reforming of the university ranking system in India, which is called NERF, and that seems to have been gaining speed recently.
Oh, wow. This was quite surprising and new for me that you mentioned today. It was like mouth opening, like something is happening like that. We knew about the paper mills, but this patent thing was like, my mind is still not accepting this. But the way you mentioned and you told that there are, duplicate designs that could easily be found, that these are the duplicate designs. So there is, proof available that this is duplicate, this is fraudulent, this is everything. But still, if universities believe in that, then this is quite surprising. Does
Exactly.
this happen, you mentioned about India because you have studied the cases from India, but these firms are based in UK. So, do you find this practice in Western countries as well? Or this is just like the countries, those who believes in numbers only?
Mhm. Well, the emphasis on numbers is really strong around the world. It's just in context like India, there is a similar pressure to meet productivity targets, but there aren't as many resources for actually doing genuine research or actually securing genuine patents like there are at universities in the United States or in the UK. When I say that these firms are based in the UK, most of the time, these firms are based at addresses that have 5,000 other businesses registered to them. So they are probably businesses that only exist on paper. That being said, there are paper mills. There are businesses that do have legitimate storefronts in the UK that are involved in this. And if we look outside of patents for a second, there is a market for paper mills around the world. There's a breed of paper mills that operates in the United States with the specific goal of preying on aspiring doctors, people that want to get medical residency in the United States but don't have enough publications to their name to be competitive. Those firms tend to be based in the United States. So I'll stop rambling. In summary, these services can be based around the world. They tend to find most of their victims in contexts where the resources for doing genuine science are most scarce.
Oh, wow. Wow, for countries like us where we actually, for my area, we believe in the value system. So we believe that the academia is actually the guiding light. But this is dark light. This,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, certainly.
yeah.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I think one thing that anybody looking into this stuff has in common is that you just feel like your brain is broken every other day. You see something that just completely breaks you and you're like, how could this possibly have passed peer review or done this, or how do I exist in the same world as this thing? So yeah, you're not alone in feeling that way at all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Reese.
you.
Thank you very much, Reese. We are looking forward to hear some more talks from you in the future. With this, we move to our next speaker, and this will be the last talk for today. We conclude Research Integrity Week with a researcher who has critically reviewed thousands of scientific papers. Dr. Salto David, may I have correctly pronounced your name, analytical scientist at Newcastle University, UK, will present identifying errors and manipulation in scientific papers with the focus on imaging. This session equipped participants with practical skills, and he flags red marks and we are looking forward to hear you. David, and I am very fan of your this bacterial mitochondria thing.
That's funny. Do you hear me all right and see the slides? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'll get started. I'm just going to warn you right now. It's very early here, and I'm going to try and keep an eye on the time. It's 5:45, and I haven't slept, so I'm not feeling too too too
We are very
too
thankful
too
to
switched
you.
on.
I was just about to ask, are you still holding on?
Yes, and Elizabeth's already spoken about images. Now, I agreed to give a talk. I was quite excited to give a talk. I didn't know Elizabeth was also going to talk, so I prepared my talk, and I have this really unenviable task of following Elizabeth, who's a real expert on this. And I'll probably skip over a few of my slides because I've covered some of the same stuff. I didn't want to miss anything in case Elizabeth didn't cover it, but there'll be some skipping, but that's fine because I think we're a little bit behind time anyway. So a little bit about what I want to talk about. There's some sort of outlines, some definitions of the types of image problems we might see. I'm going to do some case studies from Pakistan. So I asked Saba before this, I said, well, do you want some kind of stories or case studies from maybe international journals or from the US? And she said, Pakistan would be most interesting to the audience. So don't take it as an attack on Pakistan. Maybe I should have done India like Reese. It might have been more popular, but we're going to look at some gossip. And then I'll talk a little bit about maybe how common this problem in images is. I know Elizabeth touched on that. I can maybe cover that as well. And I'll discuss a bit about how to spot it. And I don't often give talks, so you might notice that. But the reason I like to give talks is I'm trying to encourage people to participate. And so this is what's getting me up very early or staying up very late to do this, is to hopefully give some encouragement for participation. And then maybe there'll be some time for questions. Let's see if I can advance the slide. So just broadly about image duplications, like I said, Elizabeth's already discussed this. Images are used to communicate the results of scientific experiments. And sometimes it's not quite what we're expecting, right? So here's a figure, and I won't spend too long on this from a toxicology paper. We've got cells which are supposed to be treated with different chemicals, but actually they show the same image. We've already seen this, discussed this. And as Elizabeth said, a lot of this kind of thing where we just have a simple copied and pasted image, it's quite likely often got an innocent explanation. Here's something that might be a bit harder to spot. And again, we've gone through some of this example of duplication with repositioning, right? If I was in the room, I'd try and embarrass people and ask if anyone knows what this tissue is. This is mouse testicles. And each one of these images is supposed to be from a mouse treated with a different nanoparticle preparation, but they overlap in the corner. And if I show the animation, you can see again, we've got an overlapping image here. So there's an image somewhere on someone's hard drive which shows the overall larger structure there. But again, they were labeled in the paper as showing treatment with different chemicals. And again, maybe there's innocent explanations for this kind of thing. You can imagine how it happens if you don't look at a lot of mouse testicle tissue. And then this is a sort of worst category, right? This is image duplication with alteration. Let me try and find the little laser pointer here. So if we're looking at A, B, and C here, these are comet assays. If you're an ancient person, you've probably heard of these. If you're younger, you may not. It's a cell embedded in some gel. It's not too important to know what it is. But if we're looking at B and C, these are supposed to be cells in different treatment conditions. But these 3 points in the lower right-hand corner are the same as these three. We turn up the brightness, C is a magnified and stretched version of B, but someone has been scribbling with the paintbrush tool. They've been scribbling out parts of these images, and they've been scribbling over the labels as well in paint or something like that. So maybe they stole this from another paper and then scribbled out things here. And so this is like the most concerning type of thing. Here's another really hard one to spot. Not spend too long on this. These areas, as Elizabeth said, it's not biology that produces these identical areas. This would be technology, right? This pixel level identity between histology or tissue samples like this just doesn't happen. So this is only produced by Photoshop and things like that. We don't really know what the original image looked like, but we can take a guess that people usually change images when they want it to show something different to what it really does show. So sometimes you'll get the original image, but not so often. And then there are other kinds of manipulation which aren't really duplications, although duplications tend to be a sort of smoking gun, very easy to prove because things are the same or they're not the same. But here's a figure from a German lab I spotted a while ago. Here's the original here, and it looks kind of normal. But if you turn up the brightness, I don't know if you can see on your screens, but there's scribbles here. Someone's been drawing like this with the paintbrush tool. Again, things have been obscured in this image that were in the original capture of the experimental stuff. So nothing duplicated here, but there are other ways that images are changed. It's not always easy to spot this if it's subtler. Elizabeth already spoke about PubPeer. This is a website where you can go and write comments on scientific papers. I often think of it like it's kind of funny. If you read a news article, you can go to the bottom of that news article, and if you've got a stupid opinion about the news, you can usually find somewhere to post it online. Scientific papers aren't quite like that, but PubPeer provides that facility to write comments of any kind on scientific papers, which is quite exciting. And, a while ago, someone studied a few thousand posts, a few tens of thousands of posts on PubPeer, and they asked the question, like, what do scientists write about when they can write about anything? And mostly, given the opportunity, scientists accuse each other of fraud. Unfortunately, so someone categorized a few tens of thousands of PubPeer comments, and they found that a lot of the comments on PubPeer are related to manipulation of images and publishing fraud and stuff like that. So that's a lot of what you can find on PubPeer. But not only, there's a tiny slither of green at the top where people have been writing positive reviews. So this is where a lot of these image problems get discussed. And as requested, I thought I'd go through, sort of reach into my archive of many comments and look at some investigations or some kind of examinations of some case studies from Pakistan. So here's a gentleman, Alamgir, and he's at the Punjab University College of Pharmacy. And he has a pretty typical Google Scholar profile. He has a better H index than me, that's for sure. And he's mostly interested in research into kind of nanoparticles or natural products and stuff like that. And if we have a look at a typical paper, amelioration of adjuvant-induced arthritis in rats through modulation of inflammatory mediators by Reeves Alpestra. It's a long title, but it's basically trying to find plants that can treat arthritis-like symptoms. If we look at a typical figure from one of his papers, we're looking at rat paws here. And in this top row, the rats are being treated with some kind of substance which induces these arthritis-like symptoms. So over time, the rat's paw gets swollen and the toes start rotting off. It's quite horrible. And then in this second row here, we're looking at rats that have been given an anti-inflammatory drug, as well as the treatment which causes these arthritis-like symptoms. They've been given an anti-inflammatory drug which reduces those symptoms, and that's this row here. And then these other rows are showing us plant extracts that also having this anti-inflammatory effect, supposedly. If we look carefully at the rat paws, which I love to do, you can see that actually there's some duplicates here. These paws are quite obvious, I think. These are slightly different scale. But these are supposed to be pores from different groups. Something like this will just be spotted by eye. And again, maybe we could wonder if this is just an innocent accident. It could happen if not spending a lot of time looking at the hairs on rat paws, you may not notice it. Here's another example, different paper, very similar concept. Again, it's a same type of experiment, except now we're testing a different plant. Again, looking very carefully here, now we've got a large number of duplicate rat paws. Again, you can see the straw in the background is the same, but these images should be coming from different groups or different days. It doesn't show an authentic experiment. If we look at that paper here, this is the same paper here, and compare it to another third paper on a different plant again, you can see that almost everything has been duplicated or plagiarized between these two papers. Almost every image is the same here, with a few small changes. I think there are a couple of different images, like this day 15 image is different to this day 15 image. So, picking very carefully through Alamgir's papers, you can find all kinds of these examples. Sometimes if you look at the controls, you may have noticed some of the control images are repeated. And maybe that's not the worst thing. Sometimes perhaps you have a legitimate reason to reuse a control, but here the numbers are all mixed up. So this is day 10 in one paper, but in another paper it's day 21. And this horrible image with the toes rotting off is maybe it was day 28 or perhaps day 15, depending on whichever paper it appears in. So a lot of recycled images from just the same narrow group of papers from this researcher. And there was also a series of papers with these X-ray images and paired histology images where nothing would quite match up between these three papers. For example, this image appears in all three, but it's given as different groups in some of them, and it's paired with different X-rays. So it just seems like there's a library of images that was acquired at some time, which has been mishmashed into a bunch of different papers by Alamgir and his co-authors. And some people may feel like they don't care too much for the pictures. They're looking at the data. Here's two papers which are about this was using plant extracts to treat high blood pressure in rats, and these are supposed to be different plants. If you look at the tables where they show kind of biochemical or organ parameters of these rats, so this is one paper and this is another paper here. Actually, you can see that even though these are supposed to be treated with different extracts, all of the numbers in this table are the same as the numbers in this table. And the controls are the same as well. Again, I tend to be a little bit more lenient on the controls. There's only a couple of differences here. I think when someone copied this table into the new paper, they missed off the 4 at the front of ALT, and this 50 has changed to a 45. Apart from that, the whole all the numbers were copied across essentially identically between two papers, but they should be showing treatment with different plants. So not only the images, but also the data copied and pasted. This is one of my favorite images. It's a Western blot. I don't know how many of you here are a biology background. Western blot is a technique for identifying and somewhat quantifying proteins in a sample. It's not too important to understand it, but all of these splodges should be unique, as Elizabeth mentioned. If we look at this very carefully, and we're looking at this COX-2 blot here, this looks normal. This one, there's a square or a rectangle around this band, and that's because it's been copied from number 6 here, has been copied down and placed into this image. And again, the same with this blot. This band has been copied from here and placed into this image. If we look even more carefully, you'll notice there's a band on the left-hand side here, which matches this one, but some of these other bands, these squiggly ones, have been drawn over with a thick black marker. So again, this blot appears to have been drawn over with a paintbrush style tool in this area. And actually, if you look at the beta-actin blot, I think this has been generated mostly with a tool, and it's not a biological image or an image of a real experiment, but was made in the computer. So it's one of my favorite Western blots. So I spent a long time documenting papers by Alamgir, and I've written pub peer comments on about 25 of those papers. I think some other people contributed too. So far, 5 of them have now been retracted. Like Elizabeth mentioned, it's a real mixed bag. Some people will take action, some people will not. To my knowledge, no lessons have really been learned from Alamgir's end. I think he still publishes much the same stuff, but I don't have access to his most recent papers. So if anyone is curious, do take a look and let me know how he's getting along in 2025, 26. I'll talk through another case study. This is another Pakistani gentleman. Again, I'll emphasize that I was requested to do some gossip, some Pakistan gossip. So again, it's a very typical Google Scholar profile. A normal amount of publications, maybe quite a few publications, but just nothing too suspicious. But if we're looking again at the image data, you can start to find some interesting things. And this is the first thing I spotted some time ago now. And actually, it's sort of borderline common. I'm looking at these bacterial plates where you're growing bacteria, and I can see there's these lines here which seem common between two different species of bacteria, although these are taken at different zooms, maybe different times. So I asked a fairly innocent question because I would have quite liked to see the full image of the plate. I asked on PubPeer, well, there's common features here in the red and blue, and would the authors please comment, and perhaps they could share the complete photos before they were cropped. So I felt that was a polite enough comment. And the response I got was quite mean. Very strange. A person with fake identity is asking about data. Professionally send your query to corresponding author via email. Having your original identity, corresponding author has all information if you have scientific interest. I would recommend that if you ever are invited to discuss your papers on PubPeer, this kind of response is usually not a very productive one. And people are very forgiving and understanding of innocent mistakes. And even if these plates were the same, it wasn't a major concern to me. But this really attracted my interest to Muhammad Usman Minas. So I started to look at more and more of his papers. Here we're looking at slices of heart tissue and images. These should be from animals in different treatment groups, and they overlap in the corners. And there's another paper here with a corner overlap, and even more papers with overlapping tissue in different groups. And this goes on and on for very many papers with this gentleman. And oh, here's one which Elizabeth actually annotated. I think I did an effort on this one. Interestingly, I think the last author here is based in the UK. He's at Queen's University Belfast, and the histology experiments were done in Pakistan, and most of these are overlapping with each other. So yeah, a really large number of problematic images in his papers. I made a YouTube video about this, which was not well received by this gentleman. He was very cross about my YouTube video, and he sent me a angry email which included my previous address, which seemed like a sort of vague threat. I wasn't too bothered about that. I also received an email warning me about some serious illegal thing that I'd supposedly done by discussing these papers. And I should be aware of the Prevention of Electronic Crime Act. And this was from another sort of gentleman associated with Muhammad Usman Minas. So I thought, oh, it would be interesting to have a look at some of his papers too, since he was so motivated to discuss by email. And actually, I was surprised this gentleman's now in Bradford. Shazeb Khan publishes somewhat with Muhammad Usman Minas, but also with other researchers. So I was quite interested to look at his papers. Here's an interesting one. Maybe it's not so obvious as some of the others. I'm looking at these nanoparticles here. They look kind of like a butt or maybe a peach. They look like a peach. Look, and these all four are very similar to each other. I'll add just a few annotations here. These cyan ones are very similar too. They're rotated. And if you look at the relationship between these, kind of look like a pair of coffee beans. Again, these are all nanoparticles that have been added into this micrograph using Photoshop. And probably you might be able to see some sharp lines sort of running across the image, which don't look quite natural. Unusually, this is the image we're just looking at. I was able to find an earlier version of this image in another paper by the same team. And this red one is very similar to this red nanoparticle here. But the whole crack and a lot of the other features of the older image have been obscured in this newer one. So this is quite nice. Every now and again, you get to see why or how images were changed to some extent. But even this image also has changes in the nanoparticles, duplicate nanoparticles in it as well. Here's another example. This is an older paper of Shazeb Khan's. I think he did this during his PhD in Bradford again. We're looking here at A and B are supposed to be electron microscope images of different drugs. I added the yellow shapes here, and you can see there's these kind of pieces in the middle which are common between these two images. So I asked about this. Eventually it was corrected, although I thought the correction was quite amusing. I'll read a little bit from the correction. It says the ACS, which is the publisher's specialist image experts, have determined these images have been manipulated. So they confirmed my view that it's not just an overlap, but there's some differences here as well, some quite significant differences missing. Like there's a piece up here which isn't here. So they confirmed that it was manipulated, but then they went on to say, to really disavow the figure. So it says the transmission electron microscope images in the withdrawn figure have little or no informational content. The particles do not show any crystal form or habit. The images were not used to characterize the particle size. There is nothing critical in these images that adds any value to the inferences made in the study. There's no discussion of the images. So I was, wow, okay, they really are not keen on these images, having subsequently discovered they're manipulated. So the result to this was a correction to that paper. And yes, I also found, lots more of these overlapping histology images, which should show different groups in Shahzad Khan's papers. And again, right up to 2025, still publishing overlapping images. So this is a scratch assay of cells growing in a dish, and they overlap in the corner. These should show cells which have been treated with different nanoparticles. So to my knowledge, Shahzad Khan is still up to the same activities. I'll talk a little bit about how I find these things. And I think Elizabeth mentioned this too, often just by looking very, very carefully, spending a lot of time staring at papers. I also use software, Image Twin. There's a couple of online tools you can use. I have my own computational process, which I'm using as well to help find problematic images like this, where they are overlapping or have cloned elements in them. And I'll talk a bit about how many papers have these kind of problems. Elizabeth has discussed her very impressive project of screening 20,000 papers. I had a more modest effort. I screened about 1,500 articles from one journal, but I think this might be quite informative to go through anyway. So I looked at a journal called Toxicology Reports. It's a pretty typical toxicology journal. And I took all the papers they'd ever published. And if you look at the 1,500 or so articles they published, maybe 1,400 of those are research papers, and then there's 122 reviews, which I didn't look at. And if you look at the research papers, we can split those into the papers which only have charts and tables and spectra, which can't be analyzed for images. And there are 700 or so papers that actually have images in them. And if you look at just the papers which have images, well, 600 seem fine, but 115 of those papers have some kind of image duplication problem. So in this journal, 16% of papers which had an image had at least one kind of error. So it's a fairly high number for this journal, but it does publish a lot of images, so that it depends how you approach that. If you look at papers with less images, you'll probably find less of them have problems. Elizabeth mentioned her effort, and I've kind of collected other people's counting tasks, and a lot of people have had to go at a similar project, looking at some papers and trying to see, well, how many of those papers have problems in them. Elizabeth was one of the earliest ones, and then since then, I think people have got a bit more wise about perhaps where to look for problems, and they've analyzed different subsets of papers. And it's very hard to get a clear look on like how many papers have duplicated or manipulated images, but I think we can say it's not like 50% of images if we're looking at the proportion, but it's not 1 or 2% either. I think if you're looking at a typical paper in a biomedical journal, or even geology papers or material science, a lot of those have problematic images. Maybe it's like a 10% chance that paper has some kind of image manipulation or duplication in it, if you're looking across people's different studies here. I'll talk quickly about Image Twin as well, and the use of tools and AI to find these problems. Sometimes I get maybe emails or messages, people say, oh, I'd like to look at problematic images, but I don't have access to software or something like this. So I mentioned before I counted all those papers in Toxicology Reports in this figure here. I actually did this twice. I counted everything just by looking with my eyes, and I found 63 papers with problems. And I was satisfied with my counting effort, and I wanted to publish that as a preprint, but it got rebuffed several times. So I went back eventually and rescanned all the papers of Image Twin, and I was able to find another 41 papers with problems. So I think that was fairly informative. You can find more stuff with AI tools, but you can find most of it just by looking very carefully. And occasionally you'll find stuff which the AI tools will miss if you're just looking very carefully. Actually, AI tools are not so great on stuff like mice and mice feet, because they tend to have a lot of false positives, because they look similar. So there are cases where you'll find that your eyes are more effective, but tools can be useful, certainly not essential for detecting problematic images. I just touch on my own activity. A little bit less impressive than Elizabeth, so I've been doing this for much less time. This is a chart which shows the number of comments that I leave every month. And you can see sort of patterns of my activity up until about 2023. I was fairly steady. And around this time in 2023, summer, I left a job that I was working and I used Image Twin more often here. And so I posted a lot more comments to PubPeer identifying problematic papers. Then I was away for a while, and I've been back recently, and this sort of spike is writing new tools that I've been using to find more papers with these kind of image problems. This is a word cloud from titles of papers that I'm interested in. And so if I take all the titles of papers that I've written a comment on, you can show the frequency of the words by the size here. So, I'm mostly interested in cancer cell mechanisms and maybe nanoparticles, toxicity papers. And I think that's because these kind of papers are often communicated with images, right? So this is a particular interest of mine, and it might give you a clue where to look if you're interested in finding your own. Some people wonder if this kind of problem is restricted to just predatory publishers, or actually, these are the publishers, the top 20 publishers where my comments appear on papers published by these publishers. And it's not too dissimilar to market share, right? These are all big publishers that you've probably heard of. I'm posting almost only in mainstream publishers because you need a DOI to write a comment on PubPeer anyway. And same case with journals. There's certainly some more fringe or questionable journals in my top 20 journals list, but there's also some big ones as well, which would be well respected. Journals like Journal of Clinical Investigation and Nature Communications, these are well respected journals, and there's still, plenty enough image problems to find in these big journals, as well as the smaller ones as well. Actually, yeah, this is one I was just doing tonight. I was looking at this paper in Nature Immunology before I gave this talk, and if you look in a supplementary figure here, this Western blot looks kind of okay at first glance, but if you turn down the brightness and increase the contrast, you can see all these elements in these rectangles that I've added are very, very similar, right? This background spots and streaks really give away that this has been kind of cut together and spliced together, which is a very common problem with this type of image. Another thing sometimes people wonder about is like, how old are the papers that we're looking at here? And do I spend a lot of time digging up skeletons from the past? And I do love to do that, but actually it's still a current problem. Even with new tools to detect these things, there are so many papers being published with problematic images. The reason that there's less comments, this is a chart which shows the number of comments that I leave and the year that I've left that paper was published. So a lot of my comments are going into papers that are published in 2020, 2021 and after, right? And less so leading up because I can't comment on closed access journals more recently. And also because I can't comment into the future. So still a very common problem, even in 2020 and 2023 papers, there's loads of papers, these kind of problems. Elizabeth mentioned sort of reception, what happens to the papers that she leaves comments on, and she mentioned patience is a virtue, right? And same for me, I spend a lot of time leaving comments every month, and this is the cumulative number of retractions that I can catch. This chart is a little bit behind now. I think there's about, more than 300 papers have been retracted following my comments. I don't always know why they're retracted, but quite often it's clear that it was because of my comment. And then, a few hundred corrections, expressions of concern, stuff like that. I don't track it perfectly. But there is occasionally action, and I think the reason for this increase around 2023 is I started emailing publishers more directly. So it does take some proactivity, even if you can find a serious problem, to actually get it dealt with. I'll talk a bit about blogging and communication. Actually, it was a question we had earlier, like what's the output? What's the benefit or reason to do this? And the output for me is I write blogs. I like to write blogs, and I know Elizabeth has a blog as well, and other people do. I write blogs for For Better Science. This is a blog I wrote about a series of papers by an institute or a cancer research hospital in the US, and this blog was covered in the New York Times because they found it quite interesting, the problems in those papers. And here's another blog I wrote a while ago about another research hospital in the US, Dana-Farber. And again, this was given a fair bit of media coverage. I don't say this to boast so much as I'd like to kind of tell people that there's a lot of interest in research integrity. People really care about getting things right. And if you find interesting things, there's a lot of public interest in understanding this kind of side of science. Now, you may not have as much luck as me, but I would say that there is a benefit to doing this, even if you're an early career researcher, perhaps. People care about this kind of stuff, and a lot of people would love the things they do in science to be have the public interested in them. And this is one thing that people do care about. I'll just finish with some conclusions and suggestions. I think I'm nicely ahead of time. There's lots of simple errors in the scientific literature, and there's some cheating. And image duplication is like a really narrow window onto that, right? It's one type of error, but there's lots of things you can look at, and there's lots of ideas in the COSIG guides that Reese mentioned. What I would say is that reading papers critically and looking for errors is really informative, even if you don't find any errors. If you sit down to read a paper and you think to yourself, I'm going to find the mistake in this paper, and you don't find it, you probably understood the paper very well by the end of it, because to find an error, you need to understand at least that part of the paper. So I would say it's a very productive way to read the literature and gain a better understanding. Research is funded by generosity, and most people can't evaluate research. And a public trust researchers to be serious. I don't think anyone expects scientists to get or researchers to get everything right, but I think they expect a fair effort at getting things right. And my feeling is that the reason that I'm doing this is it's sort of extension of part of being a scientist, and the outward spoken criticism that I do, I feel like a lot of people are quite critical of their colleagues in science. This is a tweet I saw a while ago, which really made me laugh. This line here, should we cite the crappy Gabor paper here, was published in a Wiley paper. It was published in a journal, and it looks like someone's left their internal note here, being very critical of their competitors, I think, and it survived peer review and made it into the published paper. And I think it does tell you something that, as scientists, as researchers, we can be very critical of each other, but often it's kind of done behind each other's backs. So I'm an advocate of a more open and honest discussion of errors and criticisms, which I think is worthwhile having. And this is my last slide. A very positive thing for me is, I'm not a scientist really in the academic sense anymore. I work in industry, but I love to participate in other people's research. I like to join in. You don't have to ask permission. You can give suggestions on, as long as it's a valid scientific suggestion, you can join in on PubPeer. And I won't be publishing in Nature, but I've certainly given people some hints and tips. Science is not just about peer-reviewed papers. You could blog, you can make videos, you can tweet if you really want to, and it can have an impact, right? These things can be noticed, people care about it. And if there's any kind of conclusion to my talk, is science research is difficult, it's hard. The questions are sometimes they're important, so it's probably worth trying to get it right. Have raced through this a little bit, and I think that's because, as I mentioned, Elizabeth has covered a lot of the basics about image stuff. I didn't want to repeat myself, and I think I've caught us up to time as well. So any questions, and I'll try and see them in the chat.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Instead of reporting, it is not best to perform genuine research or correct research in front of people instead of reporting the others. What we offer to the community about this?
I think you can do both, right? If you're, I work 9 to 5 full time. I find plenty of time for criticizing other people in my spare time. I don't think you need to do one or the other. I would say it's both are productive activities. If you have a really interesting research project, certainly if you're an early career researcher, you need to get those publications in if you want to advance your career. But I would say that there's plenty of time and space in most people's lives for criticizing in an authentic and meaningful way, engaging with the literature like that. I think both are fine and good, as long as you enjoy it, right? I would say be careful about expecting too much from it, because for the most part, it's not a particularly beneficial activity. But if you enjoy it, I think it can be very productive. But, make sure if you're early on in your career, get those peer-reviewed publications, focused down so you can progress. Okay.
Thank you, David. It was a very wonderful talk. And I must say that it's not about accusing, it's about protecting science, I think.
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, it's a complicated question, obviously scientists and researchers do the research. I think it's important to recognize that, and but also having productive, honest, open conversations can be improving, and lots of people have improved their papers through PubPeer. So I hope it can be a very productive activity, but also we can sometimes be it's a good idea to keep an eye on the people who are doing the worst things as well, and not be too shy about calling that out. There's some bad actors. Good to recognize that.
Yeah, because I have a comment from somewhere that why you are looking for into the work of some other people. You should focus on your work. So my comment is that if you have put your research in the market, then it's open for all. Anyone can read and anyone can comment on it, and it's like a public property. It's not your property anymore. If you are like afraid, you should keep everything in your lab and then don't publish it.
Right. Yes, I think there's a really good quote on the PubPeer commenting guidelines. It says, people who don't want people to discuss or comment on their research can just not publish it. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of space for all levels of debate on scientific papers without cruelty or penalizing people. And I would emphasize again that for the most part, all of these trivial, simple problems are not, taken to extreme, or people are very happy to oftentimes just see the true data, or maybe the data's gone. That's fine as well. It's just a discussion. Anyway, any other questions?
Yes, from audience, please. Any question? If not, then we can.
Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Thank you for highlighting these flaws. But my question is, as early researchers, there is immense pressure on students to publish, otherwise they will be perished. So all these things, are they not detrimental for the scholars?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of looking at it but I think it's important to recognize that, if you allow this sort of activity simply because it's beneficial, it obviously penalizes honest people, right? There's a bunch of people in all these systems who are not cheating and who are subject to competing with cheaters, right? So to keep the system fair requires, criticism of people when things are going wrong. Now, of course, we can think about pressures that early career researchers face, and it's unfortunate, right? Those pressures happen to everyone. But I do think, almost every job that you could do, including academia, has some opportunity to cheat to get ahead. And I don't think we should do it or accept it. And I'm not, I don't know too much about the research environment in different countries, but I can tell you that a lot of the people that I've caught in the US were not really at risk of perish. And there are plenty of people who are, very famous professors who are at no risk of perish, who don't particularly need to publish, who still engage in these cheating activities just for ego and self-satisfaction, I think. So, it's good to consider the culture and the causes of these things, but not to lose sight of the opportunity that you can be honest, and the fact that most people actually are honest researchers, and cheaters, impact that system very negatively, even if they're pressured to do it by some unfortunate circumstances.
Yes, thank you. More questions? If not, let me thank all our speakers who took their precious time for us, and as in from different parts of the world and at different odd times. We are very thankful to all of them. And now, on the behalf of researchers, society, and Pakistan Economic Frontier, and especially I would like to thank Dr. Irfan Hussain Khan for his support from Pakistan Economic Frontier. And I will thank all the speakers, all the collaborators, and all the participants who choose to learn and questions and reflect. My message is that let's carry these lessons forward into our labs, classrooms, peer reviews, and leadership roles. And I am Dr. Sabasid, and this is all from our Research Integrity Week. And we are looking forward for such kind of talks again. And thank you all, and stay committed to the science with integrity. That's the final remarks. Integrity for science is everything, and let's grow together and let's join hands for the betterment of our community and for the betterment of the science. Thank you, everyone, and
Thank
bye.
you for organizing. It was my pleasure, at least.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
Yes, I enjoyed it
Bye,
very much.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you for having us.
Thank you, Riz. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
and have a good night or good morning in Shulto's case.
We are almost about afternoon, close to afternoon.
I'm
We
going
got
to bed.
every corner of the world. All right.
Yes, good.
Yes, that's wonderful. So that we are from different parts and we can sit together on online and have a wonderful time together. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.